They laughed first. Not strangers, my own parents. At my father's retirement dinner, in front of his friends, his colleagues, and my husband, they decided it was the perfect moment to remind everyone exactly how little they thought of me. They had no idea that by the end of the night, the person sitting quietly beside me would turn the room completely upside down. The restaurant was one of those old, expensive places with dark wood walls and low golden lights, the kind where waiters wore black vests and spoke softly, like every word cost money. A long table stretched across the private room, filled with my father's coworkers, old friends, and people who had known him for decades. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating my dad's retirement after 40 years at the same company. My parents were glowing. My mother moved from guest to guest, laughing loudly, touching arms, soaking in attention. My father sat at the center of the table, straight-backed and proud, accepting praise like he'd earned every breath of it. And then there was me. I sat near the end of the table, smiling politely, hands folded in my lap. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, nothing that could draw criticism. Years of experience had taught me that blending in was safer. Beside me sat my husband, Daniel. Daniel wasn't talking much. He rarely did at big events like this. He just observed, calm and unreadable, his posture relaxed, his eyes quietly tracking the room. Most people assumed he was shy. My parents assumed he was insignificant. That assumption would become their biggest mistake. Growing up, I was never the child my parents bragged about. My younger brother, Mark, was the star. Top grades, varsity sports, business school, fast promotions. I was the sensitive one, the one who didn't quite measure up. Tonight, Mark wasn't there. He had important meetings. My mother mentioned that at least 3 times. Dinner plates were cleared. Glasses were refilled. The room buzzed with conversation and clinking silverware. Then my father stood. The room quieted instantly. He tapped his glass with a spoon and smiled, soaking in the silence. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," he said. 40 years at the company, and nights like this make it all worth it." Applause filled the room. He continued, telling stories about long hours, sacrifices, and putting family first. My mother nodded dramatically at every word. And then he laughed. "And of course," he said, waving a hand dismissively, "not all investments pay off the way you expect." A few people chuckled politely. His eyes shifted to me. "I mean, look at my daughter," he said. "Always had potential, just never quite did anything with it." The laughter was louder this time. My face burned, but I kept smiling. I always did. My mother leaned in. "At least she married someone stable," she added, "even if he's quiet." She glanced at Daniel like he was a piece of furniture. More laughter. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments about which country you're watching this video from. Enjoy the story. I felt my chest tighten. My hands shook under the table. Daniel didn't react. Not yet. My father raised his glass again. "Here's to success," he said. "Some of us achieve it, some of us learn to live around it." The room erupted in applause. And that's when I realized something. Daniel wasn't quiet because he was small.
He was quiet because he was waiting, and whatever he was about to reveal would make this retirement dinner unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. The applause faded, but the sound stayed in my ears, like a ringing that wouldn't stop. I kept my eyes on my plate, afraid that if I looked up, everyone would see how close I was to breaking. Daniel reached for my hand under the table. It was a small gesture, but it grounded me. His grip was warm and steady, not rushed, not angry, just calm, too calm. My mother leaned toward a woman across from her and said, not quietly enough, "She's always been sensitive, takes things personally." The woman smiled awkwardly and nodded. I swallowed hard. The waiters returned with dessert, tiny plates, expensive slices, things nobody really wanted but everyone pretended to enjoy. Conversation slowly restarted, but I felt like I was sitting underwater, watching mouths move without hearing the words. Then I noticed something strange. Daniel was smiling. Not the polite smile he wore when meeting new people, not the soft smile he gave me when it was just us. This smile was sharp, controlled, almost amused. I squeezed his hand, a silent question. He leaned closer and whispered, "Are you okay?" I nodded, even though it wasn't true. He tilted his head slightly, eyes still on my parents. "Do you want to leave?" Part of me did. I wanted to disappear, to escape the room, the laughter, the looks of pity. But another part of me, small, tired, and deeply wounded, was exhausted from running. Before I could answer, my mother stood again. "I just want to add something," she said brightly, "since tonight is about honesty and reflection." My stomach dropped. She turned toward Daniel this time. "You know, we were all a little surprised when you married you," she said. "You came out of nowhere. No big family name, no fancy background, but at least you seem dependable." Dependable. Daniel nodded politely. "I try to be." My father chuckled. "So what is it you do again, son? Consulting, or was it freelance something?" There it was. The question they had never bothered to remember the answer to. Daniel wiped his mouth with his napkin slowly. "Something like that." My father smirked. "Must be nice. No pressure, no real responsibility." The table laughed again, but this time it sounded thinner, forced. Daniel finally looked directly at him. His eyes were clear, focused, and suddenly very serious. "Actually," Daniel said calmly, "responsibility is kind of my job." The room quieted, just a little. My mother waved a hand. "Oh, you know what he means. Real responsibility. Legacy responsibility." She gestured around the room. "Like this. 40 years. Something to show for it." Daniel nodded once. "That's impressive." My father puffed up. "It is." Daniel paused, then asked gently, "Do you mind if I say something?" The question caught everyone off guard. My father hesitated. "Well, I suppose." I felt Daniel's hand tighten around mine. He stood. The chair scraped softly against the floor, but the sound felt loud. Every eye in the room turned toward him. For the first time all night, he didn't look like someone trying to blend in.
He looked like someone who belonged. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," Daniel said evenly. "This isn't my celebration, but since my wife has been brought up several times, I think it's fair I say this." My mother's smile froze. Daniel turned to me. "You're the strongest person in this room," he said. "You just never had an audience that wanted to see it." My throat tightened. Then he faced my parents again. "I've listened carefully tonight," he continued, "about success, about worth, about who matters." My father crossed his arms. "And?" Daniel smiled again, that same sharp, patient smile. "And I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, "about who I am and about who she is married to." The room was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving. I could feel it, something heavy and unstoppable rolling forward. Daniel wasn't defending me. He was preparing to reveal something, and whatever it was about to change how everyone in that room saw us, forever. Daniel let the silence stretch, not awkward silence, controlled silence, the kind that makes people shift in their seats and wonder if they're the ones who messed up. My father cleared his throat. "Well," he said, "go on." Daniel nodded once, as if he'd been waiting for permission. "I work in risk and acquisitions," he said. "Most people don't remember that part because it sounds boring. I usually let them." A few guests exchanged looks. My mother tilted her head. "Acquisitions for what kind of company?"
Daniel didn't answer her right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once, then slid it across the table toward my father. "Before I explain," Daniel said calmly, "could you read the name at the top of that email, out loud?" My heart started pounding. My father frowned, annoyed, but picked up the phone anyway. He squinted at the screen, clearly irritated at being put on the spot. His expression changed, just slightly at first, a tightening around the mouth, a pause that lasted too long. He swallowed. "Well?" my mother whispered sharply. My father cleared his throat again. It says Hawthorne Strategic Group." The room reacted immediately. Someone near the middle of the table inhaled sharply. Another guest leaned forward. A man at the far end muttered, "That can't be right." I blinked. I had heard that name before, on business news, in headlines about major corporate takeovers, the kind of firm people whispered about, because when they showed up, companies disappeared. Daniel nodded. "That's correct." My father laughed nervously. That's a very large firm." "Yes," Daniel said, "it is." My mother's smile vanished completely. "Daniel," she said slowly, "what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm one of the senior partners. I oversee acquisitions, restructuring, and, when necessary, company dissolutions." The word hung in the air. Dissolutions. A man across the table spoke up. "Wait, Hawthorne Strategic just acquired Westbridge Manufacturing last year."
Daniel glanced at him. "Yes." "And Northline Logistics?" another asked. "Yes." My father's face had gone pale. Those weren't just companies, they were competitors. And then I saw it, the moment my father made the connection. His company logo was printed discreetly on the menu. Daniel followed his gaze. "Oh," Daniel said softly, almost kindly, "you work at Crestwood Systems." My father didn't respond. Daniel nodded again. "We've been reviewing Crestwood for months." My mother stood abruptly. "This is inappropriate," she snapped. "This is a family dinner." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I agree," he said, "which is why I never planned to bring business into it. But respect matters to me. And tonight, my wife was treated like a joke." He turned to the table. She was treated like someone who settled, someone who failed. My chest ached. Daniel looked back at my father. "The truth is, she married someone who didn't need to talk about his work to feel important." My father slammed the phone down on the table. "Are you threatening me?" he demanded. Daniel shook his head. "No, I'm explaining context." The guests were silent now, watching like this was a trial. "Crestwood is in trouble," Daniel continued evenly. "Declining stock, internal mismanagement, outdated leadership." My father's jaw tightened. "We haven't decided what to do yet. Sometimes we restructure. Sometimes we sell. Sometimes we shut companies down." My mother's voice trembled. "You wouldn't—" Daniel held up a hand. "This has nothing to do with revenge, or family, or tonight." He paused, then added, "But character matters, leadership matters, and how someone treats their own daughter says a lot." I could barely breathe. My father looked around the room, suddenly unsure, suddenly small. Daniel turned back to me, his expression softening completely. "You've spent your whole life being told you're less," he said. "That ends tonight." He faced the table one last time. "This dinner was meant to celebrate a legacy," Daniel said. "But legacies aren't built on titles. They're built on how people are remembered when they think no one important is watching." He sat back down beside me. No applause followed. No laughter. Just shock. And beneath it, something else. Fear. Because everyone in that room now understood the same thing.
My parents hadn't just humiliated their daughter, they had underestimated the wrong man, and the consequences were only beginning. No one reached for their dessert. Forks sat untouched, coffee cups cooled. The energy in the room had shifted so completely, it felt like a different place than it had an hour earlier. My father was the first to move. He stood slowly, tugging at his jacket like it suddenly didn't fit. "Let's not get carried away," he said, forcing a laugh that fooled no one. "This is a retirement dinner, not a board meeting." A few people nodded, eager for an escape from the tension.
Daniel remained seated, calm as ever. "Of course," he said. "That's why I'm done talking about business." But the damage was already done. The guests had started whispering, subtle at first, side glances, quiet murmurs. People who had been laughing minutes earlier now avoided my parents' eyes. A man near the head of the table leaned toward his wife. "Did you hear what he said? Senior partner." Another replied softly, "I looked him up. That is him." My mother stiffened. "This is unbelievable," she muttered, "after everything we've done for you." She turned to me, her eyes sharp. "You knew about this." It wasn't a question. I shook my head. "I knew what he did," I said quietly. "I didn't know you'd humiliate me for it." Her mouth opened, then closed. My father slammed his hand on the table. "Enough," he snapped. "We are not going to sit here while our family is attacked." A woman across from him spoke up. "No one attacked you. You made comments, repeated ones." He turned on her. "This doesn't concern you." She met his gaze without flinching. "You made it concern all of us." That was when I realized something important. The room wasn't on my parents' side anymore. Daniel leaned slightly toward me. "Are you okay?" he whispered. I nodded, but my heart was racing. I had never seen my parents lose control like this in public. They had always been the respected ones, the admired ones. Now cracks were showing. My father straightened. "This is getting ridiculous," he said. "I think it's time we wrap this up." Before anyone could respond, another voice cut in. "Actually," a man said from the far end of the table, "I had a question." It was Richard, one of my father's former executives, a man my dad used to brag about mentoring. "Yes," my father said stiffly. Richard looked at Daniel. "If Hawthorne is reviewing Crestwood," he asked carefully, "does that mean leadership changes are likely?" Daniel considered him for a moment. "It depends on transparency, accountability, and whether leadership can adapt." Richard nodded slowly. My father's face darkened. "This is not appropriate." Richard didn't look at him. "It's reality." More murmurs followed. Another guest cleared her throat. "You know," she said, glancing at my mother, "I always wondered why you spoke about your daughter the way you did." My mother flushed. "Excuse me?" "It just always sounded unkind," the woman continued. "Tonight kind of confirms that." The words landed harder than any insult. My mother's composure cracked. "You don't know our family," she snapped. Daniel finally stood again, not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough to be heard. "She's right. You don't know their family, but you know how they treat someone when they think it doesn't matter." Silence returned. My father looked around desperately. "This is supposed to be a celebration. You're all being unfair." Daniel spoke quietly. "Respect isn't automatic. It's earned." That was the moment my parents realized they were alone. My mother's voice softened, suddenly desperate. "We didn't mean it like that. We were joking." I stood up. My legs shook, but "You've
my
been
voice
joking my
didn't.
entire life," I said. "And I've been the laughing so you wouldn't notice how much it hurt." Every eye turned to me. "I didn't need you to brag about me," I continued. I just needed you to stop tearing me down." My father stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Daniel moved beside me, his presence steady and protective. "This dinner is over for us," he said calmly. "But the choices you make after tonight will matter more than you think." We started toward the door. No one stopped us. Behind us, I could hear whispers growing louder, conversations breaking out, questions being asked. My parents stayed frozen at the table. For the first time in their lives, they weren't the center of admiration. They were the cautionary tale. And as Daniel and I stepped into the hallway, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of consequences they could no longer control. The hallway outside the private dining room felt colder than it should have. The soft music from the restaurant faded behind us as the door closed, sealing my parents inside with their silence. I didn't realize I was shaking until Daniel wrapped his coat around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked gently. I let out a shaky laugh. "I think so. I never thought I'd say those things out loud." "You needed to," he said, "a long time ago." We walked toward the exit together. Each step felt lighter, like I was leaving more than just a dinner behind. Outside, the night air was sharp and clean. The city hummed around us, cars passing, people laughing, life continuing like nothing monumental had just happened. But something had ended. Daniel opened the car door for me. As I sat down, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "We need to talk. You embarrassed us." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned the phone face down. Daniel didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to. As he drove, my phone buzzed again and again. Calls this time. From my father. I didn't answer. 10 minutes passed before Daniel spoke. "They'll try to rewrite tonight," he said calmly. "They'll say it was a misunderstanding or a joke, or that you overreacted." I nodded. "They always do." He glanced at me. "What do you want to do?" The question surprised me. No one had asked me that before. Not really. "I want peace," I said finally, "even if that means distance." Daniel smiled softly. "Then that's what we'll do." The next morning, the fallout began. Messages poured in from relatives, some awkward, some apologetic, some quietly supportive. One stood out. Richard. "I should have said something years ago," it read. "You didn't deserve how they treated you. For what it's worth, your husband showed more leadership last night than I've seen in a long time." I didn't reply, but I saved it. Later that afternoon, Daniel received a call. He stepped into the other room, closing the door. When he came back, his expression was serious.
"That was my team," he said. "Crestwood's board called an emergency meeting this morning." My heart skipped. "Because of last night?" "Partly," he said, "but mostly because people talk. And once they start questioning leadership, it spreads fast." I sat down slowly. "What happens now?" Daniel sat beside me. "Now they face the same thing every company does: accountability." There was no triumph in his voice, no satisfaction, just certainty. A week later, the news broke. Crestwood Systems announced a strategic leadership transition. My father's name was mentioned briefly, thanked for his years of service. No farewell interview, no celebration dinner redo, no legacy tour, just a quiet exit. My mother called that night. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Your father's having a hard time," she said. I closed my eyes. "I'm sure he is." There was a pause. "We didn't realize," she added weakly. I took a deep breath. "You realized," I said. "You just didn't think it mattered." Silence. "I hope someday we can talk honestly," I continued, "but not if it means pretending nothing happened." She didn't argue. That was new. When the call ended, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but freedom. That night, Daniel and I sat on the couch, the city lights glowing through the window. "They retired more than a job that night," I said quietly. Daniel nodded. They retired the illusion. I leaned my head against his shoulder. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the overlooked daughter, or the quiet disappointment, or the punchline. I felt seen. And somewhere behind us, in a private dining room filled with empty chairs and unfinished dessert, two people learned a truth they should have understood long ago. You don't lose power when you stop working. You lose it when you forget how to treat people. And once respect is gone, no title can bring it back.